Section 4.1 Exploring the Spirit as Consciousness. If we broaden the definition of spirit to encompass mind or consciousness, it reorients our interpretation of numerous biblical passages, moving us beyond a purely supernatural view of spirits. This expanded perspective allows us to integrate insights from psychology and moral philosophy into our understanding of Scripture. Such an approach is particularly illuminating when we consider the biblical concept of unclean spirits. By interpreting these as unclean minds, we transition from a framework focused solely on spectral entities to one that examines the complexities of human psychology and moral agency, both gifts from God. This perspective allows us to explore what happens when individuals fall into corrupt mental states or abandon their ethical responsibilities. To illustrate this, let us apply both interpretations, supernatural and psychological, to Jesus' famous encounter with a man possessed by an unclean spirit. This dual analysis will enable us to consider the depth of meaning inherent in such accounts. Mark chapter 5 verses 1 to 20. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains, and in the tombs, crying, and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God, that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send him away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out, and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they that fed the swine fled, and told it in the city, and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they come to Jesus, and see him that was possessed with the devil, and had the legion, sitting, and clothed, and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coasts. And when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed, and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him. And all men did marvel. There is much to investigate in this account, and I would like to do it in order. When Jesus encounters a man possessed by an unclean spirit, the possession can be interpreted as an external force overtaking him, a supernatural entity exerting control over his mind and body. However, if we accept this as the sole explanation, it raises several questions about the nature of such forces and their relationship to human agency, which we will examine. Alternatively, this encounter could be understood as a powerful metaphor for a mind in turmoil, estranged from higher ideals and trapped in a state of inner disarray. First, the man in this encounter is described as exhibiting unyielding strength and superhuman capabilities. Many interpret these attributes as the result of an external force, an unclean spirit, bestowing upon him unnatural power. However, this phenomenon might also be understood through the concept of hysterical strength, a well-documented occurrence in which individuals, driven by extreme psychological distress or heightened emotional states, perform feats of physical power far beyond normal human capacity. Hysteria, a psychoneurotic disorder characterized by violent emotional outbreaks, disturbances of sensory and motor functions, and various abnormal effects due to autosuggestion. The phenomenon of hysterical strength, though not entirely understood, may result from a complex interplay of physiological and psychological factors, such as surges of adrenaline or altered pain perception. These mechanisms can enable extraordinary feats of strength that would ordinarily be improbable. My reference to hysterical strength may, at first glance, appear as an attempt to dismiss the supernatural and anchor the encounter purely in naturalistic terms. However, my aim is not to diminish the spiritual dimension of this event, but rather to approach the passage with a compassionate lens that humanizes the man and acknowledges his dignity as a beloved child of God. The scripture paints a harrowing picture of his suffering. He cries out night and day, isolates himself among the tombs and mountains, and cuts himself with stones. These behaviors reflect extreme torment, both spiritual and psychological, which reinforces the depth of his anguish. Despite his isolation and pain, the text reveals a critical and often overlooked detail. When the man sees Jesus from afar, he runs toward him and worships. This act of running to Jesus reveals much about the man's inner condition. Despite his brokenness and torment, he perceives Jesus as the Son of the highest God and yearns for healing. His initial exclamation, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the highest God?" often understood as a form of demonic taunting or resistance, can alternatively be interpreted as a desperate cry for help, a raw acknowledgement of his need for deliverance. Far from being a passive recipient in this encounter, the man actively seeks restoration by approaching the one with the power to heal and transform his suffering. Even amidst his anguish, his actions reveal the innate human hope for redemption and the deep yearning to reconnect with the divine. Additionally, the man's plea for Jesus not to torment him speaks volumes about his state of mind. Given that those around him seem intent on chaining and harming him, his fear of encountering the authority of the Son of God is entirely understandable. This response highlights the man's vulnerability and his complex relationship with both his suffering and the divine power before him. A crucial and unavoidable aspect of this encounter is the man, or perhaps the entities within him, identifying themselves as Legion. This name carries deeply unsettling implications, depending on how it is understood. On one level, it may signify that the forces within him are numerous and powerful, suggesting a possession by many entities. On another level, it may symbolize a mind overwhelmed by countless conflicting forces, thoughts, emotions, and impulses that wage war within the psyche. When Jesus inquires about the man's name, and he responds with Legion, it evokes a term rich with symbolic meaning. In the Roman context, a legion was a large, organized military unit consisting of thousands of soldiers. By invoking this term, the man may be symbolically revealing the inner chaos of his mind, portraying it as a battlefield populated by numerous, discordant voices or impulses. This fractured sense of self could be likened to dissociative identity disorder, where multiple, often conflicting identities vie for control. The name, Legion, then, encapsulates a portrait of inner turmoil, a psyche fragmented and besieged by forces both internal and beyond his control. I hope that by now you can appreciate how these psychological interpretations are not only useful, but also valid, and that they do not necessarily negate the more spiritual view of demonic possession. In an earlier section where we briefly addressed the nature of reality, we posed the question: do emotions like hate arise from within us, or are they external forces that influence us? The concept of possession can similarly be seen as a symbol for a mind so consumed by destructive thought patterns or impulses that it feels as though the person is possessed by a foreign entity. The text suggests that this man once had friends, implying that he was once of sound mind. Viewed in this way, his condition can be interpreted as that of an individual who, over time, became increasingly ensnared by ideas or behaviors that grew so powerful they came to dominate him entirely. Yet, this raises the question: were these forces external, or did they emerge from within? These are important questions that I will delve into further in the sections that follow. When Jesus ultimately drives the unclean spirits into a herd of pigs, there is a deeply symbolic dimension to this act. One intriguing dynamic here is the contrast between how the man refers to himself and how Jesus addresses him. The man appears to alternate between singular and plural references to himself, which could either suggest entities speaking through him or imply a deeply fractured internal experience. Notably, Jesus addresses him as a singular individual, using singular language, never acknowledging the plurality that the man himself expresses. This subtle detail is significant, as it reveals how Jesus perceives the man, not as a fragmented being, but as a whole person in need of restoration. A striking example of the man's fragmented experience is found in his own words: "And he besought him much that he would not send him away out of the country." In this statement, he shifts between singular and plural, illustrating the internal conflict and disarray within his mind. The term devils here is interchangeable with demons, both referring to unclean spirits or, in the context I am presenting, an unclean mind. The act of the spirits entering the pigs, who then rush into the sea, further enhances the symbolic meaning. The pigs, once possessed, are endowed with an unclean mind that drives them towards self-destruction. This act mirrors a universal human tendency. When disconnected from moral grounding or a higher purpose, individuals often veer towards self-destructive behavior. The drowning of the pigs in the sea is also deeply significant, as the sea is a recurring biblical symbol of chaos. The spirit's plunge into the chaotic waters symbolizes the inevitable outcome for a mind unanchored from God, one that spirals toward dissolution and ruin. This powerful imagery conveys the truth that a mind lost in internal chaos, disconnected from divine order, is bound to drift towards self-annihilation. Isaiah chapter 57 verses 20 to 21. But the wicked are like the troubled sea, when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, saith my God, to the wicked. James chapter 1 verses 6 to 8. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Consider the term, double-minded, as it appears in the book of James, where it states that a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. The concept of being double-minded implies an internal division, an internal conflict in which a person is torn between opposing desires, beliefs, or commitments. This discord causes instability in every area of life. Decisions become erratic, relationships are strained, and actions lack coherence. If a person who is simply double-minded, caught between two conflicting views, experiences instability, how much more pronounced must this instability be for someone who identifies themselves as a legion, a multitude of conflicting thoughts, desires, and intentions? Such an individual, overwhelmed by a chorus of internal contradictions, would be even more susceptible to chaos and disorder. The foundation of their being would be severely unsettled, making it nearly impossible to navigate life with any clarity, purpose, or direction. Turning now to the Gospel of Matthew, we encounter what appears to be the same, or at least a similar, story, though it is presented in a more concise form and from a different perspective. This aligns with the general scholarly belief that the Gospel of Matthew was written after the Gospel of Mark. In Matthew's account, the focus shifts to two men possessed by unclean spirits, offering a variation on the narrative found in Mark. Matthew chapter 8 verses 28 to 34. And when he was come to the other side into the country of the Gergesenes, there met him two possessed with devils, coming out of the tombs, exceeding fierce, so that no man might pass by that way. And, behold, they cried out, saying, What have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time? And there was a good way off from him an herd of many swine feeding. So the devils besought him, saying, If thou cast us out, suffer us to go away into the herd of swine. And he said unto them, Go. And when they were come out, they went into the herd of swine. And, behold, the whole herd of swine ran violently down a steep place into the sea, and perished in the waters. And they that kept them fled, and went their ways into the city, and told everything, and what was befallen to the possessed of the devils. And, behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they besought him that he would depart out of their coasts. Immediately, we notice a difference in the language used between the two accounts. In Mark, the man sees Jesus from a distance and runs to worship him. In Matthew, however, the men, or the spiritual entities, emerge from the tombs with great violence. Upon seeing Jesus, they, or the spirits within him, instantly recognize him, acknowledging him as the Son of God. This moment aligns with Mark's narrative. However, here, the encounter quickly escalates to the proclamation, Have you come here to torment us before the time? A question that, in traditional interpretations, reveals the entity's awareness of their eventual fate. From an eschatological perspective, this suggests that the entities understand a final judgment awaits them, where they will face eternal punishment. In Western Christian theology, these demons are often associated with fallen angels, beings who, through rebellion against God, were permitted temporary influence over the world. Despite their current power, they are destined for ultimate destruction. The question they ask, before the time, indicates a recognition of a fixed moment in the future when judgment will inevitably come, and they will not be able to avoid it. However, as we progress through this volume, you will find that this interpretation may not be as definitive as many traditionally assume. However, as this volume seeks to demonstrate, the traditional view is not the only way to interpret their words. If we consider these demons as symbols of an unclean mind, their fear of premature torment could take on a more metaphorical meaning. From this perspective, the men's fear may symbolize the overwhelming experience of being confronted with the inevitable defeat of their disordered minds. But what is this inevitable defeat? It represents the moment when they are forced to face the reality that their understanding is flawed, that they are wrong. This moment reveals their inherent deception, a crushing acknowledgement that their perception of reality and morality was entirely misguided, whether by an external force or an internal one. In their rebellion, they sought to define good and evil on their own terms, but now, before the authority of Jesus, their efforts are exposed as futile. In this way, the encounter illustrates that a mind ensnared in rebellion against reality is not only seen as irrational by human standards, but is shown to be completely powerless in the face of the highest truth. Jesus, as the ultimate embodiment of righteousness and perfected human reality, renders their defiant worldview impotent. The possessed individuals, whether the two men in Matthew's account or the solitary figure in Mark, are likely suffering from what Scripture calls a reprobate mind, a state of moral and spiritual confusion. This condition, propelled by forces that distance them from truth, drives them deeper into chaos. Romans chapter 1 verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient. Within this framework, to be possessed by an unclean spirit may symbolize a surrender to destructive or impure thoughts, a mind overwhelmed by impulses and ideas that diverge from the pursuit of the highest ideal. In contrast, the admission of being wrong or surrendering to God represents the path to salvation. By presenting the Spirit in this way, I seek to offer an understanding that goes beyond a mere paranormal phenomenon. This perspective opens the door to a psychological interpretation, one that serves as a counterbalance and helps to portray a middle ground, offering a more accurate and holistic understanding of the truth conveyed in these passages.